Okay, Lynn. My name's Derek Hunsberger, and I'm excited to have you on. We're basically gonna go over a little bit of your background today, and I'll tell you, Lynn, I went on your website, and what a treasure trove. Congratulations um, on not just all that you've done, but keeping it, but pulling it all together in a website like that. It was really great for someone like me who wanted to learn. Lynn Landes, tell us a little bit about, you know, how you got into this election integrity world and what the last 20 years have been like, if you can summarize it.
Well, in the 1990s, I was an active Democrat in Yardley, Bucks County, and then we moved to Lower Makefield. So that area we were in for about 24 years. During that time, I was very active in the Democratic Party, and I became the party chair. And one of our members was Rebecca Mercury, and she had pointed my attention to the problem with touchscreen voting machines. We had lever voting machines. And she said there's this trend towards touchscreen machines, and myself and other computer professionals nationwide are really fighting against this. And so, we wrote a letter to the county election officials saying, we really didn't want the county to be purchasing these machines. Now that was in the 90s. And then, we moved out of Bucks County into Philadelphia in around 2001. And that was about the time I was looking at the newspaper, and I could see that that there was Bush v. Gore. There was the big contest over that election, and that my friend Rebecca Mercury was really had become their expert witness for computer voting security. She had just gotten her PhD in that at University of Pennsylvania and had uploaded it. And 15 minutes later, the Democrats and the Associated Press were contacting her. So I called her and asked her what was going on. And, she filled me in on some of the details. And I said, well, what about the companies that are making these machines? I mean, seems to me they're in the catbird seat to rig elections nationwide. And she didn't want to go there. Nobody wants to be accused of being a conspiracy theorist. So I said, okay, you don't have to go there, but I will. So that's when I started to do research. I have to recommend the seminal book on vote fraud is Vote Scam, The Stealing of America, 1992 by the Collier brothers. That really establishes the connections between the voting machine companies, the newspapers, the major newspapers, and news networks, actually. The exit pollsters, who they subcontract, at least they used to, before they became entirely disreputable, and pre-election polling, plus what you might call the deep state, the FBI and DOJ's complete lack of not only involving themselves in this issue, but in fact, there is evidence, Cincinnati Bell story, that sort of thing, where the FBI has been in on committing vote fraud. So that book ties it all together. And so I set about, in large part, just documenting, updating what was going on, and then looking at it in a historical perspective. And that's been really the most interesting, because the history of voting is very interesting. Although a lot has been made of when we first started voting in this country, that it was for white men who owned property, that sort of thing, and that's true. Starting with the Civil War, though, that's when they did vote openly. They voted publicly. Everyone knew who everyone had voted for. There was no secret ballot at that time. The non-transparency to what we are now discovering, or now suffering from in a massive systemic way, the non-transparency to our election system was first introduced with absentee ballots for the military during the Civil War. That was followed up on by taking the secret ballot and introducing that into the mix. So now you had absentee ballots that could be, you've lost that chain of custody, they're going through the mail. Then you've got a secret ballot, which is an anonymous ballot. It can't be traced. So when they talk about auditing an election, real auditors must be laughing or in horror, because you cannot audit something that is composed of anonymous slips of paper. So that was really the big thing. That was really the big thing that happened, that just slammed the door shut on voting transparency. And although the argument can be made that, oh, this protects people from harassment and intimidation and
at what cost?
At what cost? Yeah. That's exactly it. At what cost? And basically, if you think of our founding fathers, in the Declaration of Independence, they literally signed up and got counted. They signed up and got counted. Meanwhile, the American electorate has been lulled or conditioned to believe that the secret ballot is somehow a sacred protection, and this is what we should all want. And it's quite the contrary. And so we not only cower and not talk about who we voted for, we're not even prepared to defend who we voted for half the time. So that was the big deal. That was followed up by voting machines in the 1890s. So voting machines, a lever voting machine was introduced into the big cities. And again, they can be easily rigged. Now, that is more of a local situation. It cannot compare to computerized vote counting. That was the most cynical ploy, was in the 1965 passage of the Voting Rights Act. And that is when, there was great excitement over ensuring the vote for minorities. And yet, at that exact same time, the states introduced electronic computerized ballot scanners. And they also, the news media, the ABC, NBC, CBS, through the Associated Press and Voter News Service, conjured up these exit polls. So, and let me backtrack for a moment. Pre-election polling, as in Gallup, those kinds of polls started back in the 1930s. So when people hear about polls can serve two functions. They can serve to report on public opinion, and they can be used to shape public opinion. And they can be used to bolster or verify, as it were, rigged election results. So that's what happened in 1964. And during the Civil War, those two big events, what African Americans and other minorities and women thought they were getting on one hand, but on the other hand was closing the curtain. So it was a, smoke and mirrors is what they did. So 1964, with the Voting Rights Act, the ballot scanners, the exit polls, it was just completely set up to rig elections nationwide. And for those who think, oh, but we have different voting machine companies, and that's not true. These voting machine companies are incestuous. There are only a handful of them, and they share equipment. They may not tell you that.
Like elevator manufacturers, and there's 4 or 5 of them, but they're really the same company.
That's right. And they're really finding that out now, that parts of the software are basically the same.
Right.
And so when I first started looking at this back in 2000, 2001, um, it became clear that two of the major voting machine companies at the time, ES&S and Diebold, were started by two brothers. One started each company. And that was known. Nobody batted an eye. And then they got away with, being able to hide their software and to say, well, you can't see what this software is because this is proprietary. And they let them get away with that. They're still getting away with that. So now, actually, in the 2020 election, there is a lawsuit that has, and a lawyer who's been able to have a team access a voting computer. They do believe they have the evidence, the solid evidence that this machine was not a glitch. It was an absolute programmed manipulation of votes. But we'll see if the judge, the courts, and the Secretary of State release the information. So the thing is, voting, democracy, liberty, all these things rely on transparency. And there is no credible transparency to our election process. There's none through the voting machines, through absentee voting, through early, mail-in, fly-in, carrier pigeon, whatever they're coming up with next. There's no transparency, no chain of custody. It's a complete and total breakdown of our voting process. And it's been a long time in coming. What's interesting about the 2020 election is that this is almost an even Steven, it seems, division between high-tech rigging and old school rigging, election fraud. High tech and old school have joined hand in hand this year to really, blow the lid off.
We've had all these years to practice. Now we've hit our peak in every style of stealing election.
Right. So in my frustration over all of this, back in I think around 2005 or 6, I started suggesting that that people do parallel elections or citizen audits, and basically what that means is that you go public with your vote. And how would you do that? There are a variety of ways you could do that. One thing I suggested was that at the polls on election day, that people would stand there, and I did this one year, and say, would you mind telling me who you voted for and your name and address? And then maybe we'll have a way of verifying. And people did it. It was amazing, the number of people. They wanted their votes to count. And so particularly for, the Georgia senatorial race, they are stuck. They're going to have to use the same defective, non-transparent process that everyone's complaining about in this presidential election. So their only hope is to do something like this, to do a parallel election or a citizen audit, to take back the election. Because what we've learned is the Department of Justice and the FBI will do nothing. And it's even worse than that. They were under the leadership of Craig Donsanto, the Voting Integrity Project or Program for the Department of Justice. Craig Donsanto was in that job for at least 30 years. And basically he had a manual for how not to discover vote fraud. That's pretty much what it was. And so they were not to do any investigation until after the election results were certified, after the horse was out of the barn. And he was quoted as saying, if they did it right, no one would ever know regarding the voting machines. So he's known from the beginning that this was a completely riggable process, and yet did nothing, did absolutely nothing. And now we've got a Supreme Court that clearly does not want to address the issue of non-transparent voting and a rigged election result. They're walking away from it. Right. It's like what we have here is, it reminds me of the banking crisis. It's too big to fail.
Yeah.
So the vote fraud was so systemic, it's too big for them to judge on. So
It,
we're
it,
just going to let this go.
it's funny because it seems like, and you can maybe fill me in on your thoughts coming into 2020 if you saw this coming. But I'll just say before that, it seems like the one thing, or maybe more, but at least one thing Trump knew was everything you just said there. He knew that they're riggable elections. Whether he has proof or doesn't have proof that people try to rig it against him, he definitely knew that after the election he could say this.
Well, I would hope he knew because we sent him, myself and Professor Steve Freeman and others, Mark Crispin Miller, Professor Mark Crispin Miller, we sent him an open letter right after he got elected because during the 2016 election, he had talked about why do we have these voting machines and that we should have paper ballots. So we sent him an open letter and it was published in Op-Ed News. Several voting integrity activists signed it, saying you need to get rid of these machines. You need to look at this issue because it absolutely destroys democracy. What we have now is we've got a political leadership that has no legitimacy. No legitimacy. They can't prove they were really elected by anybody. And it's also interesting how I heard one commentator the other day say, we've been told that these states have been turning blue, but we don't know that, it doesn't look like they're turning blue at all. But when you take the news media and you take a rigged voting process and pollsters and put all that together, they can certainly paint a picture and convince the public of something that's very different from what reality is. So,
And where I was going with that, and you didn't interrupt me. I just realized after you started talking, Trump knew enough to say that the election was rigged, or however he's worded it. But what he didn't have, and what we don't seem to ever have, is an appeals process. There's no, and we've seen it very clearly this time around, that there's nowhere to turn once you have a concern or even evidence. Like, I mean, the news media seems complicit in saying there's no evidence every time they report on this subject, but I don't know that that's true.
Yes, well, the news media, this is not a news media, and now we have social media piling on top of this. So this is basically a propaganda machine. And that's why it's so important to have alternative media and others that we can refer to, because this is definitely the worst I've ever seen it in terms of people understanding what's going on. They don't. So, what do you do when the courts, you cannot turn to the courts, you can't turn to the law enforcement agencies. And what that means is people have to take these elections back. I mean, if I recall, and I think it still is, in fact, some places in New England, it's still when, the whole community votes on things. It's a public vote, they raise their hands. And I think that's, what we have to do is, I think it's up to, just like with this COVID and the coronavirus restrictions, as long as small business was lying down and rolling over, they were going to get rolled over. Mm-hmm. And at some point you have to stand up and say no. So when you have an election where the people are not, their voices are not heard, and these non-transparent voting systems continue to be used, I think it's time, that people do occupy. I'm from Pennsylvania. Occupy Harrisburg. Occupy your local state legislator's office and say, until you get rid of those machines, start with the obvious. The voting machines are the obvious things that they need to get rid of. But also the mail-in Absentee is an interesting issue because you can solve that problem, but it needs to be restricted. So for absentee voting, um, if you have nursing homes and places like that, where people can't get out to vote, then what I'm suggesting is you send teams. In other words, a poll worker together with two poll watchers, and then they can vote. You get the envelope, everything's still being observed, and you can take it back to that local polling place and have it counted at the end of the day. But it has to be restricted. And then for people who are living overseas for federal elections, like the military and people like that, they can have polling places at the military bases, at embassies, at consulates, where the people come in to vote. You can see the person, you can watch the ballots being opened and counted. That's what you need. You cannot have this loss of the chain of custody. That's where all kinds of wrongdoing can easily take place. So there's ways to make it more accessible, but voting is not supposed to be this easy peasy convenient thing. It's a sacred honor and duty. That's what it is. And the polling place is a sacred place. One thing I like to say to people is, when you're looking at risk and how you want to manage risk, basically, to put it very simply, you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You don't want central counting facilities. You don't want that. You want it distributed among small polling places.
Right.
And the other thing we need in polling places, we need the police. We need a police officer at each polling place to protect poll watchers, and in some cases, maybe to protect poll workers.
Yeah.
But the police aren't even allowed in. So this year, poll watchers were thrown out of polls and counting facilities, and sometimes with the sheriff standing right there. But I would say police should be in every polling place to protect that situation.
So one of the you mentioned, occupying or how activists have to push this issue. One of the scarier things about 2020 to me is, going back to 2004 and 2000, it was the Republicans stole the election from the Democrats. And how I got into this, my interest was the Carter-Baker Commission on Federal Elections. And Carter was saying, we have all kinds of problems with our elections, and Baker's standing on the same stage saying, but it's still the best in the world. And
No, it isn't.
and Carter's doing this. And now in 2020, we have people in this election integrity world that you've been in much, much more than I have, saying, well, Trump's a fascist. So
Yeah.
all the stuff I've been fighting for up until now doesn't justify the ends, don't justify the means. We have to, we as long as Trump's out, I don't care. And so I guess my point is, where are these independent thinkers on both sides who are say the most important thing is not actually Republican or Democrat, it's fair elections, and we can't do this every 2 and 4 years? Where is that group going to come from?
Well, that's a good point. And the issue about the 2016 election, yeah, maybe Trump did steal it. Who knows? We don't know. Now, when I started in on this, as a Democrat, I felt that not only did the election get stolen from Gore, there were, over the years, you could see a lot of voting irregularities. We would be called up by people. I remember one call, I think it was from Kentucky or Tennessee, where this gentleman called me and some other people and said, it was as if the whole election had been flipped. 60-40. Those who were supposed to get elected didn't. And I didn't even ask his party.
Right.
He said it just like the whole thing got flipped. And maybe it did, but the thing is, and just to be open and honest, although I voted for Clinton and Obama, and again, a lifelong Democrat, I also did vote for Trump twice. So I voted for him in 2016 and this time, and it makes it, I have to say, it makes it a lot easier to fight for the right thing when the candidate you voted for just got slammed. But that shouldn't really matter for election integrity. So, so I've been a big loser in 2000 and 2020, but that really shouldn't matter, because it's the process that counts. And, to be honest, I wrote an article about why I voted for Trump. And some of the things I really liked of what he did, other things I really, really don't like. I really, really don't like that he's pushing a COVID vaccine. I don't like his environmental policies. There's a lot of things he does I don't like. With the Democrats, there are things I do and don't like about that. But really, getting back to Trump, what made Trump, to me, kind of attractive is he recognized sort of the cabal between the Clintons and the Bushes, and the fact that those two families and those two parts of their party were colluding, and they continue to collude even in their charitable works. So it's, some of us think it's like these are crime families, but there's an even bigger, deeper thing going on. I mean, again, for those of us who've looked at 9/11 and the assassinations going back decades and all of that, there is a deep state. There is a group of people who think that they've got the better idea, and they are not interested in free and fair elections. It also doesn't help we have a news media that has become a propaganda machine. So we've got some very serious problems. The silver lining to this cloud in 2020, I think, and I kept saying to myself, oh, please, let's get these situations solved. Let there be no vaccine. Let there be, Trump rightfully winning. But then a little voice in my head said, or maybe not. Maybe now people have to get up off their rear ends and actually do something, because otherwise people don't. They think somebody else is going to do the dirty work for them, or do their homework for them, or do their housework for them. But freedom is not free. And it's up to every single American person, citizen, non-citizen, to really go to battle, go to fight, and not fight. I'm not pushing anything that is that way, but violent.
Right.
But sometimes that happens. Sometimes that happens. And it certainly happened this past summer. I live in Center City, Philadelphia. There was violence in the streets. We sat there defending our local Walgreens while hundreds of rioters stormed past us. It was really amazing. It was somewhat frightening, but really, it was a handful of people who, relatively speaking, a handful of people scared the heck out of the nation. Mm-hmm. And I think they scared the courage out of our Supreme Court, so that the message was, if we don't get our way in this election, we're going to burn down the cities. That was the message. So a lot of Americans are at that point. They're like, well, I'll defend my own, my own property. I can do that. I'll defend my own property. But this election, and including the COVID at the same time, and that's not an accident that these things are happening at the same time, this is requiring the average person to, in fact, do something. Just going back to COVID for a moment, my husband and I walk around without masks. We will not wear a mask. Philadelphia law or Pennsylvania law does give us an option of, if you can maintain 6 feet. Well, we kind of ignore that too, but we don't wear a mask. And even if Biden should win office or get into office and should tell everyone they got to wear a mask, we're still not going to do it. And that's what you have to do, is take baby steps and telegraph to everyone else that that you're going to do something about this. You're not going to wear a mask. Maybe you'll wear a black armband saying this election was stolen. I don't know what would work, but definitely people have to start going public with their votes. The citizen parallel elections / citizen audit idea, I think, has to start taking root, because it's our only other option. It's, what else are you going to do? So, and then also, like I said, occupying these legislators' offices, occupying the Capitol building. I certainly don't think President Trump should go to the inauguration. Why would you endorse such a tainted process? I wouldn't. However, again, the election integrity people, they needed to divorce themselves from who they really wanted to see in office and stay with the message that we need transparency, because now they've got a guy in office, or who looks like he's going to be in office, who has no legitimacy. So,
and in fact, we should all be different. Everybody I mean, I agree with things you're saying. I don't agree with some of the things you're saying, but that doesn't matter. We could be on exact opposite ends of this. We could all be on different ends of the spectrum, but it doesn't take any effort to agree that the elections need to be secure. They need to be trustworthy. And I can't really understand anyone that doesn't think that way. I mean, I think that, so I guess one of my questions for you would be, what does have to take place for us to feel this way? You started to say one of the ways would be is if we all agreed that it would be open, in the sense that it wouldn't be a secret ballot. That would change things dramatically.
That would change things dramatically. That's probably the most difficult. And because I think the easiest thing to do is get rid of the voting machines, get rid of all the electronics, get rid of them. Don't use them at all. And now it doesn't mean that they can't cheat with a straight count, but at least, you need to get rid of the voting machines. So that's the easiest thing to do that I think most people would agree with. And in terms of these drop boxes and the lack of a chain of custody, I would simply really restrict the absentee, only allow absentee voting in a very restrictive sense. And even in that, have the poll workers go to them, so that and with poll watchers in tow, so that you have a 3-man team going and collecting those ballots on election day. Everything should take place on election day. Otherwise, if you let this go on for weeks, they're finding ballots in drawers and suitcases, everywhere. That happens all the time. So those two things I think would be acceptable to the American people. The idea of going public with your vote, that needs more convincing, because many of us, when we voted for Trump in the 2016 election, and again in 2020, we lost friends.
Yeah, politically incorrect, right?
Yeah, completely. And so, there was a huge pressure on people, depending on where you live, to not vote for Trump. And, I think divorces even happened over it. So, so people are accustomed to being cowards. How else can I say it? The thing is, if you start going public with your vote, like our legislators do, they have to do everything in the open. If they don't, if they try to sneak in votes, people say, no, I want to know how you voted. Well, if we are public with our votes, I think that would really break open a huge discussion that has not been taking place. People are actually proud of the fact that they don't talk politics. They don't need to defend their position. It's just a thought in my head. But if you have to go public with your vote, all of a sudden people want to know why are you voting the way you are? And it really allows for a civic discussion of the issues. But otherwise, we're cowering and yet claiming this is a right and a privilege to have a secret ballot. It's not. It's been one of the worst things for democracy.
Yeah, yeah. And also, I mean, we have to hit accept cookies on every website we go on to. There's so many things in our worlds that we say okay to,
right,
to transparency.
mm-hmm.
It almost seems like even if we said, look, no one's going to know, we just have to have it for audit abilities, that people would still have a problem with that, I think.
Right. It would take some education. But then again, if the parties themselves were allowing people to register their open vote with them, to get it started, to open the door to open voting, and just rip the curtain off all this secrecy and non-transparency, that's where we need to go. And for the upcoming Georgia election, that's their only hope. Because they're gonna do a full repeat of these non-transparent voting processes, a full repeat of it. So and again, the Republicans might win, honestly, but who's ever gonna know?
Right.
And that's why I say to candidates, don't ever concede an election, ever. Don't ever concede it. Democrats or Republicans, just don't concede. So, yeah.
So this Christopher Krebs, the cybersecurity person that was fired, that claims it's the most secure election in decades. You're aware of him?
I'm aware of what he said.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so what? So I assume he thinks the election's on the up and up, or at least he's defending his part of the job, which, if he's cybersecurity, that's a small part of it.
Yeah. He can say anything he wants, and who's going to know?
Right.
It's interesting also that the CIA admitted that they go around rigging elections in other parts of the world.
Yeah,
why did we accept that from them and say, oh, that's okay, and or think that they weren't going to do it here?
Right.
How
do you do it here? I'm sure.
Right. But again, these one of the ways, let me just give you a few examples of how vote fraud happens, at least in Philadelphia when I was looking at it back in the mid 2000s, is that they had a cartridge. Now I guess it's a thumb drive, but they had a cartridge for every voting machine. And at the end of election day, they would give it to a police officer, would come, take the cartridge, go to the district office, upload it to some company somewhere, and then the next day, take it to the Elections Commission. So, everybody knows, or at least should know, what goes up can come back down again. So, and the AP, the Associated Press, they always had dedicated lines at the central county facilities of whatever county they were at. They had dedicated lines. So where did those lines go to, or those cables, or that transmission back in the day? And so that's where Voter News Service came in. So actually one time my husband and I, we did a little bit of detective work. So I called Voter News Service, and I got their office, and I said, I pretended to be a workman or something. I said, oh, I forgot. I didn't mean to call this office. I meant to call the other office. What's that number? And so they gave me the name of the other office. And that's where all the cables went in. And it was a building only a few blocks away. It was at the base of the Brooklyn Bridge. So it was only a few blocks away. think it was on Washington Street or something like that. And so we drove up. We drove up. I said, I want to see where this room is. And it was in a building that was like an industrial building where they made T-shirts and other things. But we went up to the third floor and we found a door that looked like the door to a safe. It was so strange. And on it was a piece of paper, and the VNS was scrawled on this piece of paper, Voter News Service. And that was, it was back in there. At one point, somebody did get cameras back there. They just had banks and banks of computers. So what were they doing? Were they getting election results and in that room, changing them, adjusting them? What were they doing? ES&S is located right next to Offutt Air Force Base. And so, you know, what are they doing on election night? You know, with the voting results. Actually, they use some of the people at the Air Force Base they would use on election nights. So I think all along, the major news networks, which includes Fox, it eventually included Fox, not initially, but eventually included Fox, and the Associated Press. Now, who is the Associated Press? Basically run out of the Dallas Morning News. So, you know, you think the Associated Press is this great organization that is unaffiliated and, you know, that sort of thing. No, no, it's all a smokescreen.
Right.
And so they have all these different entities. The voting machine companies change names, they change this and that, but it's all incestuous. They have from really the beginning had foreign influence. The memory cards, I think it was ES&S, they were not made in the United States. So this foreign interference in our elections has been there from what I can tell from the beginning. And yet our government took no interest in this. I can't believe that. So it's like the federal banking system. We have you know, that is worldwide, you know, these national banking systems that all collude. Well, we have these national election systems that all collude.
Right.
And so, you know, the 2020 election, I'm glad it happened, actually. For voting integrity, it was important it happened because in 2000, you know, it was the Democrats who got slammed. Now in 2020, it's the GOP. You know, the shoe is on the other foot, but the crime is the same.
Right. And moving forward, no matter what side you're on, you can be the victim.
That's right.
Proof now that if this doesn't get settled, you could be on either side of this.
Right. And you have to stop also and think on a practical level. Who do these people want in office? Do they want independent thinking minded politicians that are gonna you know, listen to their constituents? Or do they want someone who's got a very questionable background that they can control? And that's who you're going to get. You're going to get people who have interesting personal characteristics that can be controlled in office. And we find this every so often. We find this is happening and worldwide, and we're wondering, how did that guy get there or gal? I mean, obviously there was stuff in their background that raised a lot of red flags. Yeah, but that's how they could be controlled by big money interests.
Yes.
So again, the big message here though is go open with your vote. Your vote and what you do counts. You can't look to the Supreme Court. You can't look to the newspapers. People have lots of choices now they didn't have 20 years ago with more alternative media. Aside from the Facebook and Twitter and those people, YouTube, taking things down, people are moving on to other networks. Fox News just absolutely sank like a rock, and everyone shifted over to Newsmax and OAN News. But you can't just rely on them because the OAN News got rid of two great reporters, Graham Ledger and Liz Wheeler. So they're gone. and they were doing a great job covering COVID and other things. So
And if you can't survive at OAN, you know, it's
yeah,
someone's trying to stop you.
right. But anyway, so yeah,
Yeah,
thank you very much.
yeah. One last quick question for you. If
Mhm.
if if I were to be able to get a Secretary of State from a state or an high ranking election official from a state, what would be the main question you would want me to ask them?
Well, it's not a matter of asking them. Well, the main question to ask them is to please get rid of those voting machines. You know, to get rid of the voting machines first and foremost.
Yeah.
That's the easiest target. The American public understands computers can't be trusted.
Or I would ask, why do you trust them?
Yeah. But I think they can come up with they can say, oh, well, you know, we put them through all kinds of tests and that sort of thing. No, not with proprietary software. You don't know what's going on. And actually, one of the videos I have on my website is a interview with it was an official exam by the Pennsylvania Certification Board of one of the voting machines. I think in this case it was, I think it was Danaher, but not positive about that. And so I asked the examiner to ask the people representatives of the company about rigging elections, and they said, "Oh no, we couldn't do that. You know, we're a Fortune 500 company, and we don't do that. And besides, we'd have to know where each individual candidate and where they are on the ballot, and this and that and the other." I said, "Well, what if you just wanted to rig it for a party, you know?" And they hoed and hummed and said a few things, and then they said, "Yeah, we could do that."
We could.
But see, the thing is, the thing people have to understand is, first of all the computers are accessible through wireless. They lied when they said they weren't. They are. And secondly, when you update the computer, you have to put the new names of the new candidates in. You could do it then.
Right,
you know?
that's the perfect time. Yeah.
That's the perfect time.
Yeah.
And you have to put in the new names. So and of course we've learned from Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood and others, and of course the tremendous work of Bev Harris. She's been just a knight in shining armor for this whole investigation into voting machines. I'm just so thrilled. Actually, it was, but I will say it was one of my first articles on this issue called "Elections in America Assume Crooks Are in Control." That's the article, by the way, Alex Jones printed.
Okay.
Published, which I was grateful for.
Yes.
And Bev Harris saw, and that caught her attention, and then she shot off like a rocket. And she really rode that tiger for years. And so the weighted voting, that whole issue of the software, she helped to uncover. What I'm hoping that they will allow to be public in Michigan, the attorney who's doing this work, is that the solid evidence that the software actually did that, wasn't a glitch, that be made public. But yeah, so elections officials, there's no belief in the process anymore. People have to demand from these election officials that the machines go, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then get rid of all those, Zuckerberg's drop boxes. That's a joke. I mean, here all these ballots are in a box in the middle of nowhere or whatever. You think people can't go in there,
go wrong then.
Sort through the ballots? All they have to do is look at the signatures. I mean, the addresses on the outside, and they can look up their voter registration if they just want to go do it that way. You've got plenty of time to sort through all those ballots and, and do what you will with them. So any of that loss of the chain of custody is just a non-starter. People have to educate themselves about this. And I've tried to put it on my website as clearly as possible. But if you go to lynnlandes.com, all my websites and meetup groups and all of that is listed on there. This is under voting security, and you can find out.
Yeah, I wanted to finish with that. Your website again, lynnlandes.com, is a absolute treasure trove. Amazing how you were able to keep all that work together and have it in such great order. It's really easy to read and enjoyable to go through. It's a bit education for anyone interested in this subject.
Yeah, I do want to say it's Landis with an E,
Oh,
Landees,
I'll put that in. I'll put a
Excellent.
link and everything. So that's,
You can't imagine the number of people who put IS in there, and they're lost forever.
yeah. Get
But
everybody.
at any rate, right, I've tried to do that. I have other websites that are, archived basically, because once you put a lot of work into an issue, it's good to keep it there so that the public can access it, because these issues have not gone away.
They don't. It's the same issues from your earliest publications there. So
Right,
it's
right.
great work. Well, thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you very much for having me.
We may need you back someday. So I'll let you know.
Thank you.
Stay in touch. Okay. Take care. Thanks again.
You're welcome.